Greetings, this is the Reading Instruction Show. I'm your host, the genial one, the happy one, the jolly one, Dr. Andy Johnson. Today we are looking at the Minnesota Reading to Ensure Academic Development Act, or the READ Act in Minnesota, and we're looking at just part one, the definitions, to enable us to have a foundation for understanding what this thing is. So we're just looking at the definition part of this, but you will see that the READ Act was not designed with people with expertise in reading, and I will show you some evidence of that today. But the first little hint of this is what came at the beginning. The goal of this legislation is to have every Minnesota child reading at or above grade level every year beginning in kindergarten. And that is a noble goal, but you're going to create winners and losers because it's unrealistic. In a normal population, you are going to have 50% of the population reading below the average mean. That's called normal. That does not mean we don't do everything to enable every child to develop their full literacy potential. And the problem with the READ Act and what they're forcing teachers to use is that it impedes rather than enhances students' ability to obtain their full literacy potential. It gets in the way of their literacy development. But let's look at the definition. The first one is evidence-based, and these are the definitions. Instruction or item is based on reliable, trustworthy, and valid evidence and has demonstrated a record of success in increasing students' reading competency in the 5 areas: phonological phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. And if you recognize those are the 5 essentials, and I put that in quotes, as described by the National Reading Panel report, the 5 essentials. Now, these are 5 elements, but they're necessary, but far from sufficient. At least 11 things are essential. To say that these are the 5 essentials is like saying a spark plug, pistons, radiator, timing belt, and crankshaft are the essentials of a car engine. And no, these are all important parts, but you can't limit it to these 5 things. And we should always put things from the National Reading Panel in context, because the National Reading Panel were 14 experts put together for 18 months. And you compare that with the International Literacy Association, which has thousands and thousands of teachers, researchers, and scholars that have been together for almost 70 years. So put that in context. But evidence-based here is used. It's based on a naive understanding of what science and reading research is. Yes, you can find evidence for a whole bunch of stuff. You can find evidence for shocking mice or giving them pellets or using behavior modification techniques. That does not mean it is the best evidence or the only evidence, or evidence that is not, you can't pull evidence out of context. There's also evidence for a whole bunch of other stuff, including these things. So, and what does explicit systematic instruction look like? What does it look like for spelling? This is how, explicit systematic instruction means input, modeling or demonstration, guided practice, and independent practice. Input is the information you give. What is the input for spelling? Is it, boys and girls, this is the letter arrangement? For fluency, what's the input in guided practice? Input, oral language, vocabulary, what's the input? There's a difference, people of Minnesota and beyond, between using words and understanding them, between using words and using them correctly. This READ Act is a word salad of important words in the field of reading put together higgledy-piggledy, but not in a way that makes sense to a literacy expert. And this is the big one. I put this one up front. Three cueing systems, also known as meaning, structure, visual, means a method that teaches students to use meaning, structure, and syntax and visual cues when attempting to read an unknown word. There's so many things wrong with that, and that is the basis of much understanding. First of all, the three cueing systems is not a method, not a method, not a method. It is not a method. It's a recognition that we use multiple sources of information when we read and when we recognize words. It is not a method. It's not a skill that you teach. It's not a strategy. It's not a technique. You do not teach it. A method that teaches students to use meaning, structure, and syntax. No, we don't teach students anything. When we read and when we recognize a word, we use semantic clues, all right, to cue us, and that means context of the sentence and background knowledge. We use syntactic cues to recognize a word, that means grammar, word order. And we use graphophonetic or phonics, that's letter clues, to cue us in what the word might be. These are all clues to cue the brain as to what the reader might mean. We use all three of these. And please understand that recognizing words is different from identifying words. Recognizing. And this is where the non-experts continue to get this wrong. Recognizing a word means you see it and you automatically know what it is. Ah, I recognize you, you say. Automatically, most of you are recognizing these words here. To identify a word, you see a word in print, it's in your lexicon, but you don't recognize it, so you need to consciously employ a strategy. And there are 4 strategies that we consciously employ: morphemic analysis, analogy, phonics, and context. That is identifying a word. Recognizing a words, we use the 3 cueing systems to help us recognize words. And we don't teach this. We develop students' ability. We teach the strategies right here. Okay, fluency, and this is the definition by the Minnesota Department of Education. The ability of students to read text accurately, automatically, and with proper expression. Okay, let's unpack that a little bit. This is a more appropriate definition. Reading fluency is the ability to quickly recognize words during the process of reading, to quickly process the information. All right? Now, it's different from reading text accurately. That's called word recognition, to read text accurately. And we separate fluency from word identification and word recognition because we approach them differently. We do repeated reading in other activities for fluency, and we have a whole bunch of stuff we do for word recognition and word identification. All right, accurate expression. Fluency is different from reading with proper expression. And what is proper expression? Is there improper expression? I don't understand. And when in your adult life, unless you're an actor, have you had to read anything with proper expression? I think what they mean to say is prosody. And that is when you're reading orally, and you shouldn't do round-robin reading, but you can do individual oral reading. It's oral reading that sounds like speech, meaning it's not word by word, but it has proper inflections for questions and pauses between sentences. Prosody, simply oral reading that sounds like speech. But that's really not part of fluency. Fluency is just speed of processing. All right, foundational skills, phonological and phonemic awareness. These are the big 5, phonics and decoding, and fluency. Not the big 5, but 3, all right? Phonological, phonemic awareness, all right? These must be mastered in kindergarten, grade 1, 2, and 3. Struggling readers who do not demonstrate mastery must continue to receive explicit, systematic instruction to reach mastery. Well, that sounds good if you don't understand reading and literacy, but that's certainly not what the National Reading Panel report says. And I know those in the science of reading hold this up as a holy book, but like many holy books, the adherents have not actually read the holy book. Because the National Reading Panel report, and by the way, there are plenty of methodological concerns with the National Reading Panel report. They didn't come up with anything new. But they said that mastering a set of skills is not the answer. The impact of phonics on comprehension is limited. Phonics instruction contributes only weakly to helping students apply these skills to read actual text. Insufficient data to draw conclusions about the effects of phonics instruction with normally developing readers above first grade. And boom goes the dynamite, fails to exert statistically significant impact on poor readers in 2nd through 6th grade. But yet, what do you want to do? Boom. Must continue to receive explicit systematic instruction to reach mastery. And you may reach mastery of these little sub-skills, but our goal is not to reach mastery, it's to be able to create meaning with print. That is our goal. Nuts to all your reading sub-skills. Nuts to it. They went on to say, programs that focus too much on the teaching of letter-sound relations and not enough on putting them to use are unlikely to be very effective. Okay, that is essentially the READ Act, isn't it? Focus too much on phonics with little time spent practicing reading are likely to be ineffective. Here's a direct quote from 2-97, page 2-97. All this talk of structured literacy, systematic phonics instruction should be integrated with other reading instruction to create a, wait for it, balanced reading program. And phonics should not become the dominant component in a reading program, neither in the amount of time devoted to it nor the significance attached. Now, if reading were simply decoding or sounding out words, all this stuff would make sense. The READ Act would make sense. This focus on foundational skills would make sense. The simple view of reading says that reading is decoding, which is sounding out words, times language comprehension, meaning you sound out a word, you listen to it in your head, and there you go, you got some reading. That is a simple view, like Simple Simon met a pieman going to the fair. This is based on the phonological processing model. Words appear on the page, you decode them, and they go up in your cortex. There you go, that's what reading is, sounding out words, decoding. And by the way, have you decoded any good books lately? No. You have read good books. You have created meaning with them. The neurocognitive model is a much more robust theory. And this is based on empirical fact that 10 times more information flows down from the cortex than up from the thalamus, based on empirical fact that there is syntactic cueing, there is semantic cueing, there is phonological cueing. Absolutely. And this is the reading, transactive view of reading. We encounter words on the text, yes we do, but we use information in our head to understand what's on the page. And 3 cueing systems give us clues as to what the words might be as we are reading. Might be that is word recognition, not word identification. We're not teaching these, we develop this ability. So we do these things automatically as we read. Struggling readers in grades 4 and above who do not master must continue to receive explicit skills instruction. This is distinctly non-evidence based strategy, and we've kind of hit you over the head with that. Mastering foundational skills, one can read and read well without mastering foundational skills. That's because reading is creating meaning with print, not sounding out words. And if reading were simply sounding out words, that would make sense. Now, this does not mean, and I know people will pull this out of context, that foundational skills are not important. Yes, they are in context. One part, it is the pistons of an engine. It's not the complete engine or the spark plug or whatever part. We are focusing on the complete engine, not a simple one or two parts of the engine. This one is rich. Literacy specialist. And this is how you can tell people without a literacy background put this together. Means a person licensed by the Professional Education Licensing and Standards Board as a teacher of reading. Okay, top-down control. They are going to control who is a literacy specialist. It could be a special education teacher or a person who's completed and approved. It must be approved by the Department of Education, who seems to have no understanding of reading. So we're letting people who have no background in literacy, or not an extensive one, decide who's a literacy specialist. Now, I take umbrage with special education teachers being a literacy specialist. It is not being an expert in direct instruction, and that's what special education teachers are trained. I worked in a special education department for 20 years. You look at the standards for teacher licensure of a special education teacher and an elementary education teacher, and it's not even close to the number of reading standards for elementary versus special education. But a special education teacher is to be a literacy specialist. That's just kooky talk. That's absolutely absurd. A direct instruction expert is not a literacy expert. Now, again, I rely not on some cornball from Pelsby or the Department of Education or the Minnesota State Legislature to define what a literacy specialist is. I rely on the International Literacy Association. Again, thousands of teachers, researchers, scholars, been together almost 70 years. Now, why would you not rely on these? Why would you call in a radio journalist instead, who's been doing this for a couple years versus decades and decades and thousands and thousands? Now, this is what they call a literacy specialist. They have standards in foundational knowledge, and they have 4 components. In curriculum instruction to be a literacy expert, they have standards related to assessment and evaluation, diversity and equity, learners and the environment, professional learning, leadership. This is what a literacy expert is, a literacy specialist, a reading specialist. Now, this is what the state of Minnesota calls a reading specialist, someone who completes Department of Education, approves professional development. So instead of understanding literacy, the literacy process, the whole process of teaching and learning, it's, do you understand one of these for-profit programs? Which, when you talk about evidence-based, you may find some evidence, which I don't think you will, but it's evidence pulled out of context. Lexia Learning is a for-profit thing, making millions of dollars off the struggling readers. And I don't understand why the Minnesota State Legislature wants to support these for-profit companies. But you will not find peer-reviewed research to support letters, comparing it to something else. You will not find peer-reviewed research. CARI, Center for Applied Research and Educational Improvement, yes, it's from the Minnesota University of Minnesota, but it comes not from the literacy people. It's from the ed psych people, from the school psychologist people. It's apart from the literacy experts. So they are viewing reading simply in terms of sounding out words and what is going to produce the best sounding out word scores. This is why you'll have to unpack. This is why you have to understand reading and literacy. And again, structured literacy. Even the National Reading Panel doesn't support structured literacy, approved by the Department of Education in structured literacy. Why would I let a group of cornballs tell me what is approved and not? They obviously have no expertise in reading instruction. It's crazy. I've been doing this for decades, and I'm not the brightest bulb in the carrot drawer, but there's a lot of us around that do have considerable expertise. All right, now why they included multi-tiered systems of support is a little confusing, but let's unpack that. All right, ensuring positive social, emotional, behavioral, and developmental. Okay, now that replaces RTI, which was working pretty good. But MTSS came and it got diluted and it started focusing on behaviors or problem behaviors. But it was an intensive intervention for students struggling in reading, writing, and math. Tier 1 would be classroom supports, Tier 2 outside, and then Tier 3 more intensive. And finally, if that didn't work, then they would go to special education. And I've talked about RTI in other places. But why would you throw out something that was working pretty good and replace it to MTSS? And it's the overemphasis on behaviorism that is concerning. I mean, it was working great for academics, and a lot of problem behaviors come from frustration related to not being able to read right, frustration from being bored, frustration from having one's culture erased. Academic behavior, social, emotional, and behavioral development, too often those are code words for following the rules. Yes, the rules are important, but being subservient and following the rules, it takes away from what RTI was, and RTI was doing lots of stuff pretty gosh darn good. All right, oral language, spoken language, okay. 5 components: phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. These are the same 5 components in learning to read, by the way. And just like oral language, you learn it best from whole to part, and you learn it best in the context of authentic reading and speaking experiences. Phonemic awareness. This has to do with sounds. A phoneme is the smallest unit of sound. Ability to notice, think about, and manipulate individual sounds in spoken syllables and words. Absolutely, it's one small part of preschool K and maybe first grade. Ability to hear and manipulate the sounds. But its relationship to reading achievement is correlational, not causal. You cannot say that phonemic awareness causes reading achievement. It was co-related. They occurred at the same time, but so did a whole bunch of other stuff. So it should, yes, we should include it, but not overly much so. One small part of early reading instruction. National Reading Panel said phonemics awareness training was found to be very effective in teaching phonemic awareness to students. Duh. Okay. You're trained in something so you can do it. Okay. Very good. But instruction produced positive effects on word reading. That means single words out of context, and pseudo words. And when do we encounter pseudo words? When do we encounter words floating in space outside the context of a sign, a sentence, or a product? We don't. Early phonemic awareness instruction cannot guarantee later literacy success. Bingo. So yes, it should be a part of emergent and beginning reading instruction, but one small part. Phonics instruction, we already kind of hit on this, but everyone believes in explicit, systematic, and direct phonics instruction. Everybody does. I'm the most holiest of whole language practitioner. The holiest of whole language practitioners. And it's not the what of phonics instruction, it's the how and the how much of phonics instruction. Everyone believes, I believe in explicit, systematic, and direct instruction. Absolutely. Letters and sounds. Absolutely. But it's the how and the how much that is important. A little bit is good. That does not mean more is better. And what do we see in IEPs of struggling readers? They struggle in first grade, so you give them more phonics, and then you look at their IEPs and they're getting more of the same thing every year, so they can fail to an even greater degree. Phonics instruction is important. It works for some, not for all. You keep doing the same thing. Now, the National Reading Panel identified several ways to teach phonics, each of them being equally effective. Now, when you hear explicit, systematic, and direct instruction of letter-sound relationships, most people think of just synthetic phonics, putting them together. But there's analytic phonics, analyzing words in print, pulling it apart, embedded phonics, embedded in the context of real reading, analogy phonics, or large unit phonics, looking at letter patterns or word families, onset rhyme, and phonics through spelling. Each of these is equally effective, and the READ Act focuses only on one. And what if this one type of phonics is not effective? This is why we must have reading experts, literacy experts, designing our reading instruction, and not some cornball at the Minnesota Department of Education, at Pellsby, at the Minnesota State Legislature. I am sorry if I'm hurting your feelings, but bringing in Emily Hanford as a reading expert, please. I don't mean to insult you, but that's really kooky. She is a radio journalist, not a reading expert. Oh my. Okay, and we already talked about the National Reading Panel, so I don't need to go over that again. Now, the application of phonics and spelling. Oh, it's a good one. Let's look at that again. It says, they represent the application of this knowledge in reading, okay, but in spelling? Now, putting letter sounds together, spelling is related to visual memory, the ability to store and retrieve letter patterns, and the English language is not rule-based. There are very few spelling rules that apply consistently enough to be used. So how do you do direct instruction for spelling? And after grade 1, it's not clear how the relationships between letters and sounds help with spelling after first grade. It's not very clear there, but it sounds good. You throw in a bunch of words and you think you sound smart. Nothing sounds quite so silly as someone trying to sound smart. And it's obvious in this first part of the READ Act, the writers are trying to sound smart, like they know stuff, and they obviously don't. Okay, reading comprehension. I don't have too much problems with this, but word recognition skills and language comprehension skills, I have issue with that, but not the second part. What do you mean by comprehension skills? I mean, it sounds good, a comprehension skill. Do you mean narrative text, expository text, both of them? Because we don't approach them the same. And a skill is something you do automatically in education. A strategy is a cognitive process you consciously apply. So what do you actually mean here? And obviously, it's the simple view of reading. Word recognition, language comprehension. You sound out the word, you listen to it in your head, and bingo. And again, it's based on the bottom-up theory, which is a very weak theory of reading. Now, yes, we teach cognitive processes. These are just 18 cognitive processes that have been linked to effective comprehending. And we teach these processes when we put them in the context of a story or an article. And we create pre, during, and post-reading activities so students are reading with purposeful intent, RPI. We do this in large group, small group, and individually. And I've talked about this in a comprehension webinar. These are the skills we develop so they don't think about it, so they do these things automatically. You must understand what you're talking about. These are study skill strategies. You consciously employ these strategies when you are reading informational text. Not stories, but informational text. Important to understand that. Structured literacy, okay. Systematic, explicit, sequential, diagnostic instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, okay. Let's take a look at that. But teachers carefully structure important literacy skills. Are you saying that teachers get to design this? Because it says teachers carefully structure, meaning that they don't have to follow a reading script. That would be great if we empower teachers to design reading instruction based on their students. Imagine that. Teachers treated like professionals. because children are not standardized products. And this is the trouble I get with sequential. You think every child needs to go through the same program in the same way, in the same order. Maybe some faster and some slower. And the kooky idea is that if students don't get it, you just run them through the conveyor belt again. And that is Humpty Dumpty and thinking. That's crazy talk. Effective teachers, we teach students, not a program, not a method. Students are our scope and sequence chart. A good teacher is a kid watcher. They see what children need and are ready for them. And they teach them in the context of authentic reading and writing. We teach children, not programs or skills. We teach children. Now, I'm okay with systematic, explicit, and diagnostic instruction. Absolutely. Most people are. But sequential, that is an I-thinkism. I-thinkism based on, well, I think children will learn if we break the complex act of reading into little parts, and we teach them to put the little parts together one part at a time, like putting Humpty Dumpty together again, Humpty Dumpty and thinking again. That's how you teach reading. And when they put all the little parts together, then they'll read. And that's not how the human brain works, people. And a systematic, explicit, sequential, and diagnostic instruction. What does that look like for phonemic awareness? Boys and girls, be aware of these sounds. What does it look like for fluency, for vocabulary? You're just saying stuff and putting words together. Words mean things. Words have specific meanings. And you can't just create word salads and call it the read act. And vocabulary development, the process of acquiring new words. Yes, absolutely. But the one before says you need to have systematic instruction in vocabulary. How do you have systematic instruction in vocabulary? The question is, what is the process of acquiring new words? How do we acquire new words into our vocabularies? That's what you must understand, because children learn 4,000 to 5,000 new words a year. Do you have direct systematic instruction for 4,000 and 5,000 words? Do you tell them the definitions? Is that direct and systematic instruction? What do you mean here? You can't just say stuff. The best way to learn vocabulary, there's a variety of techniques, is through wide reading and exposure. Hearing and seeing words. That does not mean you have direct instruction in morphology, using context clues to figure out the meanings of words, and limited bits of instruction. But we learn the vast majority of our words, wide reading and exposure. All right, this is the first part, looking at the Read Act to set the foundation. As you can see, the authors of the Read Act were not experts in literacy, were not experts in reading. It is a word salad, just throwing a bunch of terms together, thinking they mean something. And words mean, words have meaning, and you can't just create word salads and call it legislation. Well, I guess you can, but you get the Read Act is what you get. This has been the Reading Instruction Show. I'm your host, Dr. Andy Johnson.